Hello and welcome to Cogito Ergo Pod, the show where we discuss, delve and dissect theology, philosophy, mysticism and the esoteric. I'm your host, Daniel, and I'm so glad you're here. Last week we stood in the shadow of the thundering Scot himself, John Knox. We saw the birth of a movement that didn't just change how people prayed, but how a nation functioned. But what happens when a firebrand leader leaves the stage? Today, we're following the smoke and the spirit into the deep, often turbulent history of Scottish Presbyterianism. If you enjoy our deep dives into the soul of history, make sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube for additional content. After Knox's death in 1572, the Scottish Kirk, that's the Scots word for church, entered a century-long tug-of-war. On one side, there were the Stuart kings, like James VI and the ill-fated Charles I, who were obsessed with the divine right of kings. To them, the king was the head of the church, full stop. On the other side were the Presbyterians, led by the iron-willed Andrew Melville. Melville famously cornered King James VI and told him that there were two kings and two kingdoms in Scotland, King Jesus and King James. In the Presbyterian mind, no mortal monarch could dictate the conscience of the faithful. This tension eventually exploded into the National Covenant of 1638, a massive document signed by thousands of Scots who swore to defend their religious freedom. This wasn't just a polite disagreement or a debate in a hall. It led to a dark period in the 1680s known as the Killing Times, where Covenanters were hunted in the hills for holding illegal outdoor services called conventicles. Figures like Margaret Wilson, a teenager who was tied to a stake in the Solway Firth and drowned by the rising tide for refusing to denounce the Covenant, became martyrs whose stories still haunt and inspire the Scottish people. It wasn't until the Revolution settlement of 1690 that Presbyterianism was finally established as the official, legal structure of the Church of Scotland. To understand why these people were willing to be tied to stakes in a rising tide, you have to understand their logic of God. This was codified in the Westminster Confession of Faith, drawn up in the 1640s. Think of the Confession as the DNA of Scottish Presbyterianism. It is a systematic summary of Calvinist theology, covering everything from the sovereignty of God to the nature of the soul. In Scotland, it became the subordinate standard, meaning it is the authoritative guide to the interpreting of the Bible. It emphasizes predestination, the idea that God is the primary mover in salvation, and the absolute sufficiency of Scripture. For a Presbyterian, if it isn't in the book, it shouldn't be in the Kirk. This produced a federal or covenant theology, where God's relationship with humanity is seen through legal and moral agreements, adding a layer of serious intellectual rigor to every Sunday sermon. Now, you might think that once they won the legal battle, things would settle down. But if there's one thing Presbyterians are famous for, it's a penchant for splitting over matters of principle. In the 18th century, we saw the seceders leave because they felt the Kirk was becoming too moderate and cozy with the Enlightenment. However, the biggest earthquake happened in 1843, an event known simply as the Disruption. The core issue was patronage, the right of wealthy landowners to choose a local minister regardless of what the congregation actually wanted. Led by the brilliant Thomas Chalmers, a man who was as much a social reformer as a theologian, over 450 ministers walked out of the General Assembly in Edinburgh. Chalmers declared that they were leaving the state establishment, but they were not leaving the church. It was a staggering act of sacrifice. These men gave up their homes, or manses, their salaries, and their buildings to form the Free Church of Scotland. They built hundreds of new churches from scratch in a single year, all to prove that the crown rights of the Redeemer, the supreme authority of Christ, belonged to the people in the pews, not the elites. If you were to walk through a Scottish town today, you'd likely see several different kirks. You might wonder what the difference is. The largest is the Church of Scotland, the National Kirk. Today, it's quite broad and inclusive, often taking more liberal stances, such as ordaining women and allowing same-sex marriage. In contrast, the Free Church of Scotland, often called the Highland Kirk, remains staunchly evangelical and conservative. They focus heavily on the Bible, and for a long time they were the standard bearers for exclusive psalmody, singing only the psalms without musical instruments. However, even this group saw a significant fracture in the turning of the millennium. In January 2000, a new group emerged, the Free Church of Scotland Continuing. This split was deeply painful and complex, sparked by a desire to strictly maintain the worship practices of the 19th century fathers, including a total rejection of hymns and musical instruments in favour of the human voice alone. They see themselves as the remnant, keeping the original flame alive. Then you have the Free Presbyterian Church, a 1893 breakaway that is even more traditional, often referred to as separated for their incredibly strict adherence to the original Westminster Confession. When we compare this to other denominations in Scotland, the differences are stark. Unlike the Roman Catholics or the Scottish Episcopal Church, Presbyterians don't have bishops. The word presbyter literally means elder, and that defines their bottom-up structure, while Episcopalians and Catholics operate through a centralized hierarchy. Presbyterians are governed by a series of councils. There is a long-standing stereotype that Scottish Presbyterianism is all about being dour. No dancing, no fun, just long, grim sermons. While there is a serious intellectual reverence to the faith, the practice is actually rooted in perhaps a beautiful sense of simplicity and several core values. Firstly, there is education. Because the priesthood of all believers is central, everyone needs to be able to read the Bible. This value gave Scotland one of the highest literacy rates in the world, and a belief in education for all. Then there is anti-hierarchicalism. There is a deep-seated value that all men are equal under God. This isn't just a religious point, it's the foundation of modern Scottish democracy. The Sabbath is crucial to them as well. Traditionally, the Lord's Day was kept strictly for rest and worship, a practice that gave rise to the quiet Scottish Sundays of the past. In a Presbyterian kirk, the architectural focal point isn't an altar, it's the pulpit. This is a physical representation of the idea that the proclamation of the word is the most important part of the service. They also traditionally practiced fencing the table during communion, a serious self-examination before taking the bread and wine, emphasizing that faith is an active, deeply personal commitment. Perhaps most importantly, the minister doesn't run the show alone. They are balanced by elected ruling elders from the community. In the past, the Kirk session even acted as a local court, disciplining members for everything from working on the Sabbath to gossiping. While that sounds harsh today, it creates a society that was remarkably socially responsible. It was a spiritual democracy, ensuring that the power of the church stayed in the hands of the people. Scottish Presbyterianism is a story of stubbornness in the best sense of the word. It's the belief that your conscience belongs to God alone, and neither king nor parliament can take it from you. It shaped the Scottish character, logical, democratic, and perhaps a little bit argumentative, but always deeply principled. From the blood-stained moors of the Covenanters to the modern debates in the General Assembly, the Kirk remains the heartbeat of Scotland's history. Thank you for joining me for this journey through the Kirk. If you found this episode enlightening, please rate and review us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It helps others find the show. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube for more content on the history of faith and the esoteric. I have been your host, Daniel, and thank you for listening.